Again, welcome to everyone. We really want to thank you for joining today and taking the time to be with us. Just to let you know, a recording of this first session is going to be available. And by first session, I mean when we're talking about the CERF guidelines. So that will be available next week. This first part where we're going over what CERF is. And so that will be available next week. My name is Mary Collins, and I'm the program manager for the Community Economic Resilience Fund. And I want to give a really big shout out to the team that's been working diligently on this program for the past couple of months. You'll hear from some of our team members today that have been working really hard, not only to put together this series of workshops, but also working on the guidelines that we'll be speaking about. It's not only our team at the Office of Planning and Research, but also the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development and the Labor and Workforce Development Agency that is working hand in glove on this program. So we've got a real big team and brain trust that's working on this program. You won't get to hear from everyone today, but you will get to hear from a lot of folks from OPR that are working really diligently on this. And so I want to give a big thank you and a big shout out to everyone for all of their efforts to get us this far today. So just to give us a little bit of context on where we've been and where we're going to get situated today, we had in January a stakeholder webinar where we had the opportunity for input, and we also had a public comment period. During that period, we heard from over 140 different organizations. And so over the past couple of months, we've been working to incorporate feedback into our guidelines. We recently put those guidelines out on our website, and today we're excited to be able to walk through them and enable the opportunity for public input, to hear from you. Another thing I want to emphasize, since that's changed since we last got together on our prior webinar in January, is that we have had a funding change since that time. So previously, we were funded by the American Rescue Plan Act, and now we're funded from state general funds. And so there's not substantive changes on the program, but it does give us a little bit more wiggle room in terms of timelines and some arduous reporting that we had with the American Rescue Plan Act funding. And so that is one change that we've had since we last were together in January. And I want to, kind of emphasize why we're here today. So as I mentioned before, we're here to review the guidelines, but also give an opportunity to provide input, really hear from you and enable networking in the different regions. We will not be having a full public comment period like we did last time due to timing constraints on our end. So just really today is a great opportunity to share your concerns, share your ideas with us. We have note takers in all of our sessions, and we're diligently working to collect all of these and be able to answer all of your questions and be able to really make sure the guidelines is reflecting what folks in the regions are reporting back to us. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Fabiha, who's going to go over the agenda for today. But I want to give you a big welcome and thank you so much for carving time out to be with us today and for your continued collaboration. Thanks so much.
Oh my God.
Thank you, Mary. So we'll go ahead and get started with an overview of the agenda to run through what we're covering today. So next up, you'll be hearing a little bit more about the CERF program objectives and the program design. After that, we'll go into a guidelines overview, so the planning phase draft guidelines overview. So some of the things we'll be talking through during that section include the post-award requirements and deliverables, application requirements and submission, and scoring and reporting responsibilities. And then after the guidelines overview, we'll be finishing up with timelines and next steps. We'll be going over some important upcoming dates and sharing the upcoming CERF guidelines and workshops. And then once we have wrapped up that overview of guidelines and timelines and next steps, we'll be moving into our breakout rooms. And these breakout rooms are designed around the 4 categories of the program and the guidelines that our team will be reviewing today. And this is where we'll be collecting feedback on the guidelines, hearing your questions, answering your questions, or hearing your concerns. And I will go into a little bit more detail on what those breakout rooms will look like later in the session. But after the breakout rooms, we will have our CERF regional networking sessions. And so at the end, this will be about 20 minutes to allow for some relationship building and networking with other folks or organizations within your CERF region to promote collaboration on the CERF program. So that's an overview of the agenda. And as we move to the next agenda item and go through elements of the guidelines, you all are welcome to follow along in the draft guidelines document itself. The presentation will follow the order of that document. So I'm going to hand it off to Jesus, my colleague Jesus, to start the overview of the program and planning phase draft guidelines.
Thank you so much, Fabiha, and thank you all for being here today. I'll go ahead and get us started with our program objectives. Our first program objective is to promote a regions up approach to economic development, centered in equity and sustainable growth. Our next program objective is to support inclusive planning, a first of its kind approach to a program of this scale. We don't just need the perspective of local workers and community members. We also need to create systems that shift decision-making power to them, because inclusive planning is a pathway to ensuring equitable outcomes. Our last program objective is to align investments and priorities to make sure we maximize the benefit of these resources. Not only do we want to align with other state and federal programs, but also with private capital investments and philanthropy efforts. Next slide, please. Within our program, there are 2 phases, the planning phase and the implementation phase. The planning phase created 13 regions that will each receive up to $5 million to conduct an inclusive planning process that builds upon existing relationships and spurs new partnerships. Each region will create a high-road transition collaborative made up of a diverse set of strong partnerships across the region and continue with established relationships. At a high level, the plan will outline different strategies and proposed projects, some of which can be funded through the implementation phase of the program. Next slide, please. Like I mentioned earlier, there are 13 CERF regions that were developed for our program. We released them for public comment in November of 2021 and finalized them in December of 2021. We created these regions to not only break up silos and foster collaboration, but recognize that partnerships formed at this scale can continue to attract funding from the state and other sources. Next slide, please. In addition to the planning and implementation phase of the program, we'll also be offering $20 million in planning and implementation for California Native American tribes. This funding opportunity is open to federally and non-federally recognized tribes. We'll have more information on this soon, and we'll continue to update you as soon as we develop the set aside. Now I'll go ahead and pass this over to my colleague Matt to talk about post-award requirements and deliverables.
Thanks, Jesus. As Jesus mentioned, we'll move on to the outcomes and deliverables of the planning phase. This phase will have 2 main products, the High Road Transition Collaboratives and the regional plans. The HRTCs will be measured on how equitable and inclusive their tables are, whether the partnerships built are strong and sustainable, and whether the regional plans and proposed investments are feasible and can effectively create high road economies. The regional plans will focus on an accounting of current economic conditions in the region, as well as strategies for recovery and transition. Next slide. Specifically, the HRTCs will need to demonstrate the strength and diversity of their coalitions, provide a detailed outreach and engagement plan, explain their governance structure and decision-making process, and detail the steps they took to ensure an inclusive process. In the application development phase, the fiscal agents and regional conveners should be developing the application with their partners. These partners and the fiscal agents and regional conveners will make up the High Road Transition Collaborative. However, the state expects and encourages that the HRTCs to grow throughout the planning process, especially as they implement the outreach and engagement plan and update the governance structure to reflect changes in the HRTC composition. Next slide, please. The regional plans will focus on presenting a snapshot of the region and detailing transition and investment strategies. It will present the vision and goals of the plan and map stakeholders in the region. The plans will require 8 analyses: a high-level summary of regional demographics and socioeconomic conditions, an assessment of past and current economic development efforts, a description of recent economic shocks and their impacts, an assessment of anticipated climate impacts and environmental issues across the region, an analysis of public health metrics across the region, a labor market or workforce analysis, an industry cluster analysis, and a SWOT analysis, or strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The idea here is that the plans take a full account of the factors shaping economic development in each region before developing strategies for recovery and transition. In the strategies and planning section, the plan needs to focus on growing targeted industries that create accessible high-road jobs, diversifying the region's economy, improving the capacity of the region to respond to economic shocks like COVID-19, increasing economic equity, improving health and environmental disparities, and aligning with existing state goals. I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Nader, to talk about budgeting and performance requirements.
Thank you, Matt. Diving into budgeting and performance requirements, we have provided details about the allowable uses of funds and the guidelines. And the great news is that a significant portion of each table's budget can go towards using funds for research, data collection, planning and communication tools, and of course for community and for deep community engagement. Conveners are also able to compensate participants for their time and labor, of course under certain circumstances, and also pay for consultants. We are also really excited to be able to offer advance pay, which is available for CBOs. Up to 25% of the total grant can be awarded through advance pay. A traditional reimbursement model is also available if that's desired. Next slide, please. Talking about the application requirements and submission, to submit a complete application, applicants need to provide a couple of things. A concept proposal explaining how they plan to convene their tables and develop plans, statements of capacity from both the convener and fiscal agent, an MOU between these two entities if they are separate, and a collective partnership agreement letter. These letters should be signed by a diverse group of stakeholders representing the region and must include an agreed upon outreach and engagement plan, governance structure, proposed budget, documentation of meaningful engagement, and all of these should be signed by all the members involved in this process. Next slide, please. Scoring and reporting requirements. After the application deadline, the CERF team will review proposals that meet the minimum qualifications. The team will decide about funding based on scoring criteria, performance history, and regional and target population needs. Talking about the scoring rubric, it has 5 categories. Objectives and vision, which refers to how well the applicant outlines a strategy that meets the goals of CERF. Organizational capacity, including a demonstrated history of success. High road elements, including robust community engagement and a vision that increases access to high road jobs, considering equitable outcomes. Project plan, which focuses on integration with existing processes such as other regional or sub-regional plans, clear plans for implementation, and a clear justification for the proposed activities. And last but not the least, a governance structure that illustrates strong, diverse partnerships and transparent and equitable decision-making processes. So I talked about the scoring rubric. Now let's dive into the reporting that the grantees need to provide. There are a couple of reporting requirements. 1, monthly and quarterly status reports. Next one would be planning phase final plan that lays out the structure of the HRTCs and an estimated budget. Regional summary report, which will be part of the regional plans. Lessons learned report that details grantees' challenges and achievements. an evaluation report to guide the evaluation of the planning phase. And I should also mention that all the grantees will be required to participate in a statewide evaluation by providing data and information requested by the evaluation team. I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Fabiha to talk about timelines and next steps.
Thanks, Nader. So here on this slide is a snapshot of the planned program progress for the next few years, including some deadlines. This timeline also includes updates on the implementation phase and the tribal carve-out as well. And a more detailed timeline can be found in the draft guidelines themselves and also on the OPR website. So can we, next slide, please, Lois? So here are just a few important upcoming dates to keep on your radar. We are hoping to release the planning phase final solicitation during the week of May 23rd, and it'll be open for an 8-week period, and we hope to award and begin the contracting process the week of August 8th. Just want to highlight that after the release of the guidelines, the week of May 23rd, we will host a bidders conference shortly after that release, and there will be an opportunity to submit questions to the CERF mailbox ahead of that bidders conference. And we won't be answering questions one-on-one, or the OPR team won't be answering questions one-on-one or providing technical assistance during that application period. So this opportunity and the bidders conference and up to the release of the solicitation will all be time to ask questions around the guidelines and clarification questions or whatever it may be. Next slide, please. We're really excited to announce that we'll be hosting guidelines workshops in Spanish and Cantonese next week. So we would really appreciate if you're able to share with your colleagues or within your networks as well. This Southern California workshop wraps up our 4 regional workshops. And then of course, next week, we're moving into the Spanish and Cantonese workshops.